Shalom, welcome back everybody. Hope you all had a nice Shavuos. For many of us, this is the first time we were out and really spending time with other people. It was really a pleasure. Here in our synagogue we had a dinner Sunday night, and people were telling me it was the first time they had a communal dinner with other people for the year. It was wonderful. So here we are back in the regular life that we have. And I'd like to share with you an idea. The Alter Rebbe, the founder of the Chabad movement, used to say, a Jew needs to live with the times. A Yid darf leben mit der Zeit in Yiddish. A Jew needs to live with the times. And what did he mean? He didn't mean the New York Times. What he meant was the Torah portion of the week. That every week, the Torah portion speaks to us. Not that it happened centuries ago, but it's happening right now. And in the Torah portion, we can learn tremendous lessons for what's going on right now. Many years ago, I taught in San Diego at a special program called Hebrew High. It was for high school kids or junior high school kids, and it was once a week on a Tuesday night. And the idea is the kids came to learn something, and there were different topics, different classes. And I was asked, what class do I want to teach? So I said, well, what class do people not want to teach? And they all agreed that they don't want to teach the 8th graders. They were the worst. These are kids who are right after their bar bas mitzvah. They were not interested in being there. And I was young and innocent and ready to go with a really good challenge. So I said, give me the 8th graders. So these were kids from Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox homes. And they were not day school kids. So I went into the class, and I looked around these class, and their eyes were moving around. They weren't really interested in it. And I explained to them, I said to them, each week we read the Torah. And in the Torah portion, there are things there that we can relate to in the events of the day. They said, no, Torah is old, Torah is not relevant. I said, sure it is. I said, okay. So I brought a chumash with me, and I said, okay, what's going on in the world today? What are the news? What's happening? Well, they would tell me something that was happening. We're talking about the early 1980s, late 1970s. We would talk about maybe the situation in Iran with the revolution, or the gas prices that were astronomically high at that time. If you remember, there were lines around the block to get gasoline. They were talking about how difficult the economy is, and at the time we had American hostages in Iran. So they would bring up these topics. And I said, okay, let's take a look at the Torah portion. Without any preparation, I would open up the Torah to the portion of the week, and we'd look through it. And sure enough, we found something that was relevant and important for us during that week. It was uncanny. It was unbelievable. I said to them, let's go further now. The Torah portion is divided up into 7 aliyahs, 7 parts. Each day corresponds to one of the aliyahs. Sunday is the first aliyah. Monday the second, etc. In each aliyah, they will find things that are relevant to this particular day. Open up a newspaper today and see what are the events going on. What are the headlines in today's newspaper? Now let's take a look at the Torah portion for today. Is there anything we can see that is relevant to today's events? Invariably there was. And I did this week after week after week. The kids were flabbergasted by this. They couldn't believe it, that the Torah is so relevant to what's going on today. I'll tell you one more story, and then we'll go into the Parsha. Many years ago, I had a very, very dear friend in Los Angeles, and he worked for Chabad, His name was Rabbi Yitzchak Arnold. He was a very good friend of mine. Unfortunately, his wife Chana just passed away a month ago. We were very close to the Arnolds. Anyhow, Rabbi Arnold, his job was, he worked for Chabad in Los Angeles. His job was to go to all the various nursing homes, old age homes, where there were Jewish people, and he would speak to them as a chaplain. He would do Shabbos programs in various of these places on Friday afternoon or Friday morning. Say Shalom Aleichem and make a motzi on the bread. And he would also give a Devar Torah. He would speak to them. Rabbi Arnold was a very Hasidic guy, and he used to speak to them words of Torah, words of Hasidic philosophy, and he noticed that the people were not interested. The people were just looking around. They were bored. They were yawning. Some of them were falling asleep. And he was very disturbed by this, and he didn't know what to do. He wrote to the Rebbe, and he explained the problem to the Rebbe. The Rebbe said to him as follows, Rabbi Arnold, get yourself a subscription to the Los Angeles Times. Get a subscription to the newspaper, the Daily News. Well, Rabbi Arnold was not a newspaper man. He would rather sit and learn Torah. But the Rebbe told him, get a subscription to the LA Times and read the LA Times every day. What an unusual request. But from the Rebbe, he did it. So he would get the LA Times and he would peruse the headlines and glance through the paper every day. And then he would come to the nursing homes and he would take the events of the day and relate them to the Parsha of the week. Immediately, he had everyone's attention because people are interested in current affairs. They're interested in what's going on in the world. And they're also interested in what the Torah says about it. And from then on, he became the most popular speaker of anybody because he was relating to what was going on. Now, let's get into the Parsha. What's going on today? Today, of course, we are in the middle of Israel's battle in Gaza, in stopping the rockets and in preventing the loss of lives. And it seems that Israel is coming under a lot of fire, not just from the Gaza rockets, but from all the demonstrations and the anti-Semitism around the world that's going on now. Just a few days ago, there was a group of Palestinians who walked by or drove by a Jewish restaurant, a sushi place, and they saw a bunch of Jews sitting there, and they asked them if they're Jews, and they said yes, and right away the Palestinians came and beat them up. They beat them up. So this is happening in our backyard. It's happening in our cities today. Before, anti-Semitism was something that happened once in a while. But now, anti-Semitic attacks are happening on a daily basis. It's become dangerous for Jews to walk in the streets of America with a yarmulke on. It's an unbelievable thing. I remember when I went to Europe many years ago, I was told, don't wear a yarmulke in public. Wear a hat in public, because there's a lot of anti-Semitism. They see a yarmulke, they could attack you, they could possibly kill you. I couldn't believe it. In Europe today, in the modern era, that's what they're doing again? Have they learned no lessons from the Nazi era? It was sad, but now it's happening in America. In the United States of America, it's happening. That it's becoming dangerous to walk the streets with a yarmulke on, with tzitzis hanging out. It's a terrible, terrible thing. So what are Jews to do? Are Jews to hide and to stay away, or not? So this week's Torah portion is a portion of Naso. And Naso recounts all of the various gifts of the tribes to the temple. But it starts off with the words Naso es Rosh, to raise up the head. Well, this is talking about a census that the Jewish people are supposed to make, and the idea of lifting up the head means to take account, to take a census. However, the literal Translation of this is literally to raise up the head. Raise up the head. And it refers to a fundamental and guiding principle of Jewish life. And what is that? So the Mishnah instructs us, and actually the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch that he wrote, his Code of Jewish Law, starts with this: be bold as a leopard to do the will of your Father in heaven. This means not to be ashamed in the face of scorn. When people are attacking you, don't be ashamed, don't hide. And this is a principle by which Jews have lived throughout the ages. Sometimes Jews have been afraid. Jews lived in places that to reveal your Jewishness was possibly very, very dangerous. You could possibly die from something like that. So how do we fulfill the mandate to lift up our head? Naso esrosh. How do we do that? So when confronted with ridicule, when people attack us, when people make fun of us, the Torah tells us, raise up your head. Go above it. Go above it. Don't be afraid. Don't be ashamed of who you are. Don't be ashamed. I remember years ago when I was a kid, on my street, there was at the end of my street was a housing project for poor people. And from time to time, the children of these poor people, many of them were quite roughnecks, would come into our street and they would harass us. One time I was riding my bike with my friend down my street, almost across the street from my house. And my street was practically all Jewish. And three of these kids stopped us with our bikes. I must have been 8 or 9 years old, maybe 10 years old. And they said to my friend, "Are you a Jew?" He was afraid. He was afraid to admit it. He was afraid what they were going to do to him. So he said, "No, I'm not." So they said, "Oh, I can tell a Jew when I see one." Then they turned to me and they said, "Are you a Jew?" And I said, "Yes. Yes, I am." I wasn't ashamed. And they kicked my tires a few times and then they let me go. My friend afterwards said, "Why did you tell them you're a Jew? They could have beat you up. Why did you say that?" I said, "Well, because I'm not afraid and I'm not ashamed of who I am. And you shouldn't be either. We should not be ashamed. We should not be afraid of who we are. We should stand up proud and be proud of that. And when we do that, the non-Jews will respect us more." Many years ago, a young man came to see Rabbi Manis Friedman in Minnesota. He had a meeting with Rabbi Friedman about something. And before they started, Rabbi Friedman welcomed him into his office. And the man said, "You want to hear a funny thing?" Rabbi Friedman said, "What?" He said, "I just went to lunch before I came here with some colleagues of my new office. I just moved here and I have a new job. We went to a pizza shop. So we went to this pizza shop and there were about 10 of us. And the waitress came to us and said, "Okay, what would you like to eat? What would you like? What kind of pizza do you want?" So all the way down, each one of them said, "What do you want?" He said, "Pepperoni pizza. You, pepperoni. You, pepperoni. You, pepperoni. You," referring to me, "cheese." Cheese? Everybody looked at him and said, "Cheese? Why don't you have pepperoni on your pizza like everybody else? After all, the company's paying for it. You can have whatever you want." So he thought to himself, "Well, I'm a vegetarian," he told them. "I'm a vegetarian." "Oh," they said, "you're a vegetarian. Very nice, a vegetarian. Everyone respects vegetarians. It's so cool. It's so hip." Very nice. So this guy went to Rabbi Friedman and he said, "Isn't that funny? I told them I was a vegetarian, so they didn't give me a hard time. If I told them," Rabbi Friedman said, "Why didn't you tell them you could keep kosher?" He said, "Because they would have made fun of me. Because kosher is not cool. Vegetarian is cool." Rabbi Friedman looked at him and said, "You know, you missed a wonderful opportunity. You should have told them you keep kosher and you can't eat the pepperoni and the pizza. You can't do that. They're not going to make fun of you. They're intelligent people. They're going to respect you, and it'll give you an opportunity to explain to them what kosher is. Maybe they're not familiar with it. Maybe there could have been some Jews among that group. He said there were. Maybe there were some Jews among that group that would learn from you, and maybe they would be inspired to keep kosher also. We should not be embarrassed of who we are. We should be proud of who we are. If we go to a meeting or a convention or something, we should not be ashamed to order kosher food or to ask to take off for Shabbos or holidays or things like that. We shouldn't be afraid to do that, because if we do that, people will have respect for us more than they might even now. Many years ago, we had a fellow in our community who moved to Chicago from San Diego. He moved there basically because of more educational opportunities for his children. His children needed a high school. They needed a lot more kids around them. So Chicago has some large high schools that are very well known, especially in the Chabad community. So he moved to Chicago. He went to Chicago, and he was a computer scientist. He applied for various jobs. One particular interview, he was interviewed by a woman, and she looked at him. He's a Chabad guy with a beard and a yarmulke, and she asked him about his background and his expertise in the field that he was working in, and she was quite impressed by all of that. Then finally she said to him, "Why are you moving from beautiful, lovely San Diego to cold, freezing Chicago? I mean, everybody wants to live in San Diego, and why would you want to move to Chicago?" So he said, there are more, he stammered a little bit and said, "Well, there are more job opportunities here. I think it was better for my career." She looked at him and she said, "You're moving here because of chinuch, aren't you?" Because of education for your children. He looked at her, and she was a religious woman. He said, "Well, actually, yes. Yes, I am." She said to him, "Well, why didn't you tell me that? I would understand that, and I'd have great respect for you, that you're willing to uproot yourself from a beautiful, wonderful climate, a lovely seaside community, to cold, windy Chicago because of your children, because you're concerned about your children's education." And this was an opportunity he should have told her right off the bat, "I'm a religious Jew, and this is what I do, and this is how I act." So it turned out that way. We Jews need to be proud of who we are. We can't be worried about what the non-Jews will say or how they will act. In this current situation in Israel, that Israel is finding itself in, so far, the United States and other countries are putting a great deal of pressure on Israel to stop the raids on Gaza. Israel every day is sending many, many fighter planes and blowing up enemy targets, military targets in Gaza. And they're doing this relentlessly. And the Gazan Hamas military are feeling it. They're feeling it very badly, probably more so than is being reported in the press. Many Hamas military leaders are being killed. Their houses are being destroyed. Their bases of operation are being destroyed. Now the world community is outraged by this. How is it that you're going in and innocent people are being killed? Yes, innocent people are being killed because that's where the Hamas put their rocket launchers, in these buildings. The building that was destroyed, housing the Associated Press and other media outlets, was also a military target. Hamas puts their rocket launchers in those particular areas, in children's playgrounds, in places like that on purpose, because they want Israel to attack them. And the world community is coming down strongly on Israel. and asking them, pleading with them to stop the bombardments. Meanwhile, the rockets are coming in from Gaza nonstop, and Jewish people in Israel are being endangered by it. But nevertheless, so far, we're finding the Israeli leaders, thank God, are not capitulating. The Israeli leaders are staying strong, and they're saying that they will continue this until their mission is completed. I don't know if they're going to be able to do that or not, because the pressure is unbelievable. We remember the pressure that Menachem Begin was in to give back the Sinai, and during the peace David, the David Accords, the Camp David Accord, he was under enormous pressure to capitulate, and unfortunately he did. He did. Ariel Sharon was under enormous pressure to give back Gaza to the Arabs, which at the end he did, and we see the results of that. But now, so far, the Israeli leaders are staying strong, and they're continuing relentlessly, and until hopefully it'll stop, but it won't stop just temporarily. It should stop hopefully permanently, if that's possible. But the only way to do that is naso es rosh, to lift up your head, go beyond it. Don't worry about what the world is saying. Don't worry about what a bunch of movie stars in Hollywood are criticizing you, or media people in CNN are criticizing you for doing these things. They will criticize, and they will come down. And as time goes on, and as this mission continues, the criticism and the demonstrations and the threats of holding back financial aid to Israel will become stronger and stronger as time goes on. Israel must be relentless. Israel has to continue until it's over, and to make sure that they are not pressured by the other nations of the world, especially the United States, to do a ceasefire before they are ready to do so. And as we mentioned, I think last week, the only ones who are really knowledgeable as far as that's concerned are the military leaders, the generals. The Israeli generals are aware of the situation, and they know what to do, and they know when to stop. They are the ones that we should follow, and it's essential that we do that. The Rebbe was also very, very strong. I think if the Rebbe was alive today, that's exactly what he would tell them. When they were about to go into Damascus, I think in the 1967 war, the Rebbe told them to continue to go on, and they didn't listen to him. The Rebbe believed very strong that you must have a strong hand in dealing with our enemies. Only with a strong hand, with strength, can we succeed. If we are weak, they will see we are weak, and they will continue. And I'm afraid that these days, the Arabs are seeing there's weakness in the Israeli government. They're seeing weakness in the American government, and as a result of it, they're giving themselves an opportunity to get a foothold in the situation. And Israel has to realize that, and to raise their head, lift up their head high, and not be ashamed to do what has to be done. Let's continue with another one of the ideas here. In this week's Torah portion, we talk about the Isha Sota, a woman who was accused of being unfaithful to her husband. It is not that she had adultery. If she had adultery, she would be stoned. That's the halacha. But it's not known if she had adultery. She suspected of it based on the fact that she was seen alone with another man for the period of time it would take for them to commit adultery. So the Torah says, ish, every single man, kitista ishto, whose wife turns aside from the way of holiness, and she is unfaithful to him, or she creates a sin. She does something wrong. So what's going on here? what is happening? Well, we know that the process is that if the husband warns her and tells her not to go and see so-and-so, not to be alone with him, not to be near him, and she goes ahead anyways after she has been warned, and two witnesses see that she is alone with him. They bring the woman to the Beis Din, to the court, and a Kohen is there. They uncover her hair, and they ask her if she committed adultery or not. If she does not admit she did it, they test her with the waters of bitter waters. And the water, if she drinks the water, they put God's name written on parchment in the water. That's the only case where God's name is actually erased. We do not generally erase God's name. It's not considered a respectable thing. But for the sake of Shalom Bayis, of peace in the home, we actually erase God's name. We see that peace in the home is even more important than even God's name. So we put the parchment in the water, and the water eats up God's name in the water, bitter waters. She drinks it. If her stomach explodes, it bursts, then she has been guilty and she's been punished. If nothing happens to her, she's exonerated. And her husband takes her back, and we see that as a reward for her faithfulness, she is granted a child. She's granted a child. So the Torah says, how did all this happen? How did it come about that this woman ended up in this situation? And why would her husband take her back? After all, she was seen with another man. She was seen, and he warned her, don't be with that other man, even not to do adultery. I just don't want you to be with that other man. He suspected that she was going to do adultery. And so the fact that she was not completely innocent, even if nothing happened, but she was warned by her husband to stay away from that guy. Her intentions were not good intentions, and she did not act in a modest way, and therefore he does take her back, even though perhaps he would not want to, or perhaps she wouldn't want to go with him. But she understood through this whole process that she did not act properly, even if there was no adultery. So it says that tista ishto, his wife turned aside. The word tista comes from the word shtus, shtiyot, foolishness. The word is sin tet hey. That's the root of it, sata, and it's an interesting word. The word here means to turn aside. As it says, Ein Adam Oisa Avera, that a man does not do an Avera transgression, Ela Shenichnas Bo Ruach Shtus, except if a spirit of foolishness enters into him. That's the only way. If we only listen to our brain, Hamoach Shalit Al Halev, if the brain rules over the heart, a person will generally not do anything wrong. But if the heart is what motivates a person is motivated not by their intellect, but by their emotions, that's when we get into trouble. Every sin is caused by the emotions, not the intellect. If a person is only guided by their brain will never tell them to do anything bad. Their brain will tell them, if you do the sin, it will separate you from God. Is that what you want? You want to be separated from God? Obviously not. Nobody wants to be separated from God. The fifth Rebbe of Chabad, Rebbe Rashab, writes in one of his classic discourses, Kuntrus Umayin, a very famous discourse that everybody in Chabad learned. He says there that no Jew wants to be separated from God. Nobody. You'll ask a Jew, do you want to, if you want to be separated? Of course not. Definitely not. So why are you doing this Avera? And he'll say, well, because I don't think God cares about that. God really doesn't care what I eat or don't eat. God really doesn't care if I wear wool and linen in the same garment. Do you think God really cares? Well, what if God does care about that? If you believe that God really cares about that, would you do it? Most of them will say, no, I wouldn't do it. I would never do anything if it's going to separate me from God. The Rebbe Rashab would say that every Jew is connected with God like a rope, as in the verse, Ki Yaakov Chevel Nachalaso. Yaakov is the rope of his inheritance. And what does it mean? The connection that we have to God is like a rope. A rope consists of many, many strands. Every single strand makes the rope stronger. Every one. So what happens? We do an Aveira, we lose a strand. Another Aveira, we lose another strand. Until eventually we are completely doing everything wrong. We are completely non-religious in every respect. So all the strands of the rope are gone. There's only one strand left. One strand is always with us. And what strand is that? That strand is that he is a Jew. And they say that Ki Shem Yisrael Yechuna. He is known as a Jew. The word Yechuna comes from the Kinoi, which means a nickname. He's called by that name. Ki Shem Yisrael, by the name of Yisrael, Tikna, he is called. He is called. The only thing that he has left is he's a Jew. And that's all he's got left. And for many of us, that's all we've got left. But the idea is that we need to strengthen each strand we have. And one strand after the other, the more mitzvahs we do, the more the rope is stronger, until eventually it is very strong, and that is if we are completely observant. But what happens? A spirit of folly comes into us, a ruach shtus comes into us, and it tells us that this is okay to do and it's not bad, and our heart tells us to go ahead and do it because we want it, as our sages tell us that the heart desires, and the person goes after the heart. So the problem is we go after it. You know, it's like you wake up in the middle of the night and you have a taiva, you have a desire for a sandwich. You have a desire. Nothing else will satisfy that desire but this particular sandwich, maybe it's a cheese sandwich or a salami sandwich or something like that, but not cheese and salami together, that's for sure. So he has that desire. Where does it come from? Where does that desire come from? It comes from the emotions. It's purely an emotional, desire. In fact, the word for a desire in Hebrew is ta'ava. A ta'ava is different than other types of desires. There is a ratzon, which is also a desire, but a ta'ava is a very deep-seated emotional desire. A very deep-seated emotional desire. Like Hashem created the world, he did it through a ta'ava. The Alter Rebbe says that God had a ta'ava to create the world, and that's how he created the world. A ta'ava is a very deep-seated emotional desire, request. And it comes from, in many cases, it can come from foolishness. Your doctor tells you gotta lose weight. You wake up in the middle of the night, you have a tremendous tava for ice cream. I gotta have ice cream. But the doctor says don't do it because it'll make you sick and everything. But the person has a taiva. And they say, in Yiddish there's an expression, if a taiva mefregen nikan kashas. On a taiva, you don't ask any questions because, after all, it's a taiva. It's a desire. And that's what it is. Unfortunately, a taiva can be a very dangerous thing. It can be something that can get us into deep, deep hot water. And indeed, what it causes that it happens that we turn aside from the way of goodness to the way of foolishness. That is the taiva. And that is what shtus is all about. Shtuyot. Shtuyot means it's foolish. There's no reason for it. There's no good reason for it. In fact, in Hebrew, we call what the Christians call the devil, we call Satan, Satan. And the word Satan comes from the word Sata, which means turn aside. What does the Satan do? The Satan causes us to turn aside from the way of goodness to the way of evil. That's what the Satan is. In Hebrew, the Satan, in Jewishness, the Satan is not an anti-God figure like in Christianity, where he fights God. In Judaism, the Satan is actually the angel of death, the Malach HaMavis, which God brings down to try to encourage us to do bad things. The Satan, it says, Satan hu yetzer hara. The Satan is the evil inclination. That's who the Satan is. And the Satan is, just like every angel, a servant of God. The Satan has a mission. The mission is to give us free choice so that we will be tested and tempted to do the wrong thing. That's what the Satan is. The Satan does not want to be successful. The Satan wants to fail in its mission. But, like every angel, it has a mission. And that's its mission. Its mission is to cause us to entice us to do sins. And that's what we're supposed to do. So that's what happened to this poor lady. She was tempted. Maybe she was attracted to this man. Maybe he enticed her with good words, kind words, or told her that her husband really doesn't love her, or whatever it may be. And she was attracted to him, and she went ahead and followed her Yetzer Hara. She followed the Satan inside of her, who was telling her to do bad. And as we mentioned, it says, Satan hu Satan hu Malach HaMavis. The Satan is the angel of death. Because what does the Satan do? It causes death. It causes us to have a spiritual death, and sometimes a physical death, if we do a very, very serious crime. So the Satan turns us aside from the way of goodness to the way of evil. And that's the idea of Kitishta Ishto, that we need to not follow. We need not to turn around towards that. So how do we act? If we are tempted to do something that we should not be doing, whatever it may be, in the physical realm or the spiritual realm, and it is turning us aside, it's turning our head, it's turning our mind to try to encourage us to do what we should not do, we need to turn the other side. We should remember that we also have a Yetzer Tov, a good inclination, which is from God. It's part of the godly soul that's inside of us. And the good inclination should be stronger than the Yetzer Hara, stronger than the evil inclination. And how do we do that? So the Alter Rebbe explains that we need to change the topic. We need to go and turn around and change the topic to another topic. Change the way we're looking at things. And that's what we need to do in Israel as well. We need to not be worried about what the non-Jews are saying, but we need to go ahead and do the right thing, no matter what it takes. So I want to wish you all a good week. We want to wish brachas, blessings, and prayers for Israel and for our brave Israeli soldiers that it should be successful. And hopefully this should be the end of all the rockets and all hostilities with the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu, B'mheira, B'yameinu, B'karav Mamish. Amen.